Okay, who would like to start now? I would like to return the floor to the LO. Welcome to the exhibition round of NUDC Kopertis 5 2018. In opening government, we have Mr. Akbar as Prime Minister and Mr. Rafli as Deputy Prime Minister. In opening opposition, in opening opposition, we have Riri as Leader of Opposition and Deputy Leader of Opposition, Mr. Stefanus. And in closing government, we have Riri as member of government and Anselmus as government whip. And in closing opposition, we have Mr. Urfan as the member of opposition and Haikal as the whip of opposition whip. The motion of this round is, assuming it could be done peacefully, this House will replace all existing government with a single global democratic government. To open the debate, let's call upon the Prime Minister, Mr. Rafli. The Prime Minister. Before we start the debate, please turn your mobile phone to silent. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, for far too long, the nations of the world are manipulated with a feeling of nationalism, chauvinism, and so on. What this triggers is that conflict around the world have revolts, and we need a reformation of government as soon as possible. What do we want to provide and achieve in the opening government is that to achieve the world peace and also equal redistribution of wealth and resources that is spread all across the world. So what are the concepts that we provide in our side of the house? First of all, what we want to provide is that the eradication of nationalism. That is to say that there will be no citizenship. All citizens will be identified as a global citizen. That is to say, we provide a cosmopolitan identity instead of national identity. But second of all, the existence of a leadership candidate coming from the election for all around the world, that all of the individuals with equal power could eventually be elected and also becoming a candidate. But third of all, what we want to also provide is that the global parliament representative. So we are trying to prevent the idea of plunder. We are going to have a representation whom and from whom the power came from. So that is to say, all of a nation can enacting their interests. But last but not least is that the judiciary body that's going to follow supranational bodies and enacted by international agents such as Interpol and UN peacekeepers. So I'm going to bring you three things in my points of arguments. That first of all, I'm going to talk about the urgencies of a global government creation, that is to say the context of chauvinistic conflicts. But second of all, on the moderate scenarios, I'm going to talk about the existence of a welfare distribution and preventive of more conflicts. And last but not least is about the trade of why, even if we left out certain culture or ideologies, it is fine to begin with. Now, first of all, going to my first points of arguments, talking about the urgencies of global creation in one key respects. So let's talk about the context of current government and also conflicts around the world. The existence of conflicts around the world on the extreme level caused by a selfish interest and dictated by a single government, by an executive president or a dictator. The notion that decided by each nation are currently backlashes on each other. That is to say, one nation could be a communist, meanwhile another could be an expansionist, liberals, protectionist, and so on and so forth. So what kind of situation that triggers by this kind of notion, ladies and gentlemen? By all of those kind of self-centered interests, the leaders around the nation are arbitrarily deciding and manipulate their citizens to go to war for one and another under the banner of nationalism, chauvinism, and also primordialism by propaganda and agitation to hate those who oppose you in the very first place. So what kind of things that coming from this, what kind of harms coming from this kind of things, ladies and gentlemen? First of all, is that the conflicts, the idea of opposing who are the difference from your identity or even not trying to pursue your interests. That is to say, example given on the current status quo, the conflict in between the Israel and Palestinian, for example, Turkish and Syrian Kurds driven by the existence of nationalisms, and also China, USA in the existence of a world trade war, ladies and gentlemen. So what kind of things that we want to fix in this kind of system is that those kind of system that is followed or even manipulated by nationalism is currently irrelevant to begin with. What we want to create, a global supremacy in and of itself, will create no longer a reason for them to fight one another. There are two effective things coming from this. First of all, the moment when the international body have created, they will have a direct conflict resolution towards what is happening on the status quo. What happens in the opposition side of the house is that the international bodies only gives you a recommendations through Court of Justices, for example, or even through international arbitration, which do not have any kind of binding power on one and another. But second of all, the moment when we are trying to wash out all the nationalism and also chauvinism that existed, we want to create a cosmopolitanism that all of the individuals have the same stance for all for the world in Indonesia. So that there is no reason for them to fight. Before that, yes.
We think the Israelis and the Palestinians will still have different religions and different cultures on your side of the house. Are you going to erase that as well and make them all the same religion?
But even, first of all, we do not want to eradicate the existence of religion or even your personal choice in and of itself. What we want to create is that the moment when you have a conflict, at least we have a direct resolution from those kind of conflicts, ladies and gentlemen. We are trying to acting as a direct executive government that gives you order and stability. But second of all, let's talk about the idea of welfare distribution, which operates on the moderate scenarios, why economic context or the divided government is harmful. First of all, what is happening on the current status quo is that each nation are interdependent on each other. That is to say, a comparative advantage of one country could not be provided from one another. Like example, given how African nations have resources and Western have the technologies and so on and so forth. But their own selfish interests that driven by each individual's government have created several barriers on the status quo. First of all, the moment when each nation have a different interest to begin with, what kind of going to be happen is that the existence of plunder and also monopoly, ladies and gentlemen. That is to say, this kind of nation could fight one and another upon economic reasons. That is to say, that one of the external scenarios that they are trying to use forces to bow down towards one and another. Like example given upon what is existed on Iraq and Kuwait. Caused by oil resources and so on and so forth. But second of all, the plunder also happens the moment when you are trying to impose sanction to begin with, ladies and gentlemen. But second of all, what is happening on the status quo is that the existence of manipulation from one and another. That is to say that the big countries are trying to control the market, that they are trying to invade and also give investment through bribery, through imposing the policies through WTO, by free market and through foreign aid. Sounds so good in the very first place. But what kind of harms from this kind of situation is that there is no democratic process to begin with. That one nation are going to dictate from one and another policies. Like how big nations in IMF, for example, the moment when they have a big shares and big donation, they are the one who decided that policy. In our side of the house, there will be a democratic discussion on how that the government is accountable for one and another's, so that they will going to redistribute their resources towards equally towards all countries in the name of prosperity, peace, and justice. We're back to propose.
Prime Minister of the House spent 7 minutes and 27 seconds.
To respond to the case for Prime Minister, I welcome Ms. Riri. The floor is yours.
the world is diverse, everyone is different. That's why the one single democratic government is not going to work in the very first place, right? So, ladies and gentlemen, they are trying to say that the conflict and selfish interest will be no longer happen under their side of the house, right? But we believe that the check and balance will always be there, and it's going to be hard under their side of the house because they will no longer direct check and balance from the society, exactly because the elections is not fair in the very beginning. So that's I'm going to talk about. I want to extend it in my arguments, right? So, ladies and gentlemen, the problem is that, yeah, we agree that the exact problem faced by this country is inherently because the incapabilities of the current government itself. But it's not necessarily means that we are justified to replace the government with a single global democratic government, even if the leader has been elected in globally democratic way. We can see that it's not justified and it's not going to be fair in the very beginning, and this proposal is not exclusive in the very beginning, right? So our stand here is very clear that we stick to the current status quo, where all countries having their own government and mind the business of their own nations, because we believe that the check and balance is still there, and also other country is still there to monitor them and also giving them like, for example, negotiations, and also giving them advices in the end of the day, right? Ladies and gentlemen, our goal is that in a sense to let the country to be measured on their own. I will prove you three things. First of all, the justifications point of the cases. Second of all, that these motions is not exclusive. And the third, and the lastly is that the trade-off or the harms and benefits, right? So moving on to my first argumentations of the justifications point. Why it's not justified? Ladies and gentlemen, we believe that a single democratic government is not actually understand a problem of a specific country, ladies and gentlemen. Even though in the models of the government they will send representations or etc. We believe that it's still not effective, ladies and gentlemen, because under this side of the house, the government will not focusing on each problems of the country itself, but it's going to be very confusing in their side of the house, right? Because we believe that every nations have purposes to develop their countries, right? And also everyone inside the country itself is having every nations itself have a values or for example constitutions inside themselves, and even if it would change in the end of the day, it should be coming from them in the end of the day, because we believe that everyone have a different culture. Maybe some of them are actually communist, maybe some of them are liberal, and it's very hard for them to be actually mixed, mix them all in one strict regulations. For example, it's going to create a chaotic, massive chaotic situations under their side of the house, right? So the government side of the house should actually guarantee how these models could run well under their side of the house. Second of all, why it's not exclusive? Because we believe that the election will never be fair in the very first place. Because the one who will win these elections is mostly the strong nations that is holding a massive or a big effect towards all of these nations itself, right? And we believe that those people is also having their own interest, right? And in our side of the house, under their side of the house, the worst scenario is that it's going to easy for the government to manipulate all of the country of the world, because exactly they have all nations under their heads, ladies and gentlemen. So it's going to be hard under their side of the house to actually doing a check and balance towards the government itself, right? Like, especially in the policy making. Like, for example, that the government is want to implement certain regulations that is actually not working and also cannot be accepted in current or several layers of society. Yes, for
That's an argument against a government, because on every government, you will always have minority legislative government. So on their side of the house, it's not exclusive even when you have national government.
Ladies and gentlemen, but under our side of the house, exactly, they still have a chance to protest the government, right? But under our side of under their side of the house, it's going too hard for them because it's only a single massive government, ladies and gentlemen. So what will happen under their side of the house is that not all of the interests of the society could be captured by the government itself, right? And even if it's going to be a good governance in the end of the day, it's going to still backlashing the values of every nation itself, right? And the lastly is that the trade-off, the security, ladies and gentlemen, the security they are nagging about, it's not. We believe that it's not the primary objective to intervene the nation's problem, because exactly they have a different problem, and why we are concerned that they could actually finish their own issues, because in the end of the day, that country will learn from the mistakes or the problem that actually happen inside their nation, right? Because, like for example, that what happened with Japan in the Second World War, they are exactly learning what is the cost of the war that exactly happened to the nations or even the world. Ladies and gentlemen, we believe that the security will be happen in our side of the house. But even if the war is still happening, like in Syria or even in Palestinians with Palestinians and Israel, but we believe that it's okay. At least they are having a two different government. That those government is having a primary objective to actually they are actually having their responsibility to finish that problem. That's all from me.
Leader of Opposition spent 7 minutes and 16 seconds.
Team, I summon Mr. Akbar. The floor is yours.
Because notice, ladies and gentlemen, even in countries right now, those particular differences of culture, the particular differences of races are still necessarily there. So basically, ladies and gentlemen, for the argument to fly, they have to prove the distinction between the current government and the government that we're trying to pursue. Without that, ladies and gentlemen, those particular urgencies of diversities and differences couldn't fly anywhere, right? But two things in my speech. One, I'm going to talk about the principle, whether or not the concept of nationalism is still relevant. But number two, I'm going to talk about the practical, which side could serve a better government at the end of the day, right? So it goes into my first issue, right? We're talking about the principle, whether or not the concept of nationalism, the concept of countries are still relevant. So basically, ladies and gentlemen, their main contention is talking about diversity, and there will be a diverse focus of a government. Therefore, this is not good. But the question is, ladies and gentlemen, why the diverse focus is necessarily exclusive on our side of the house? Because notice, ladies and gentlemen, in a system of a government itself, this particular diverse focus is still necessarily happen anyway. Because you have to eventually deal with the economic sector, and at the same time you have to deal with the political sector, for example. And at the same time, ladies and gentlemen, the government as a function itself should have a diverse focus. But on the side of the house, ladies and gentlemen, our contention, and Rafli brought to you that the context of how this particular, how the context, right? right now that the countries are interdependent. So basically, concept of countries that are happening right now are no longer relevant because countries are no longer needed in a sense that we are global citizens. The fact that the existence of international law, the fact that those particular international laws are now necessarily binding to all of countries, and all of the countries are necessarily forced to succumb to this particular national law. But assuming, ladies and gentlemen, they brought things like the context of this particular diversity, the context why these particular different interests are necessarily needed to be catered differently in each region and in each geographical proximity. Well, this is still bad anyway, right, ladies and gentlemen? Because notice right now, ladies and gentlemen, even if on the other side of the house, what they're trying to glorify are a different cultural relativisms and a different culture in every sectors, it is still bad anyway. Because right now in the context, even when countries are existed, and even when those particular governments are still there, meaning, ladies and gentlemen, there will be a hierarchical situation within this particular culture. Meaning, ladies and gentlemen, even if on the other side of the house, they try to defend that these particular people need a different treatment to a different culture, but there will be also hierarchical. For example, why xenophobia happens? Why white supremacy happens? Because there are a pride of culture and there are a pride of something that they are trying to break. In every single country, for example, United States feel like have the interest of the hegemonical, for example. And this particular thing will continuously create a hierarchical for this particular thing. So we say, ladies and gentlemen, by principle, the concept of countries right now are no longer relevant because right now, ladies and gentlemen, the concept of countries are necessarily hampering down the process of cosmopolitanism. The process that uniting this particular humanity as one and as a global citizens, where they can eventually have the basis to eventually saying that everywhere, some part of the community are necessarily worse than them and those particular things, right? So therefore, in conclusion, ladies and gentlemen, the idea of principle, why the concept of the countries are not necessarily relevant. But even if that we will try to that this particular clash is a deadlock, right? Because on our side, because at the end of the day, the debate would be that the debate of the context, where the context that differences are needed or cosmopolitanism are needed. But at the end of the day, ladies and gentlemen, the derivation of this particular principle are necessarily having the basis of the importance. So as long as I can prove in the next clash why our government are necessarily more important and why our government are necessarily more likely to happen more likely to happen, therefore, ladies and gentlemen, we want this debate, right? But goes to my second issues, right? About the practicality. Which side could serve a better government at the end of the day? Their main contention is talking about there will be a hard check and balance in the policy making and so on and so forth, right? But I'm going to negate this idea. Why? Because the check and balance will be necessarily easy at the end of the day because there are a clear structured government in our side of the house. Because Rafli, I've told you, ladies and gentlemen, the idea of the creation of government is not necessarily like we have United Nations, but there are a structured government within a particular world in and of itself. Therefore, ladies and gentlemen, the representation, this particular check and balance within community will necessarily be there anyway. But even if, ladies and gentlemen, on the side of the house, that the idea of representations are necessarily not good anyway, like how United Nations right now work, right? Because why is it okay? At least on our system, ladies and gentlemen, every single leader that tried to eventually, every single leader that tried to eventually wanted to be the leader of the world will eventually appeal to this particular minority within this world. Why is it okay? This particular minority within the particular world will have this particular bargaining power that in order for this particular leader to go on, they need the vote from this particular people. So, ladies and gentlemen, in our side of the house, but the particular check and balance system is necessarily there in equal to all layers of society, necessarily that if the community is big or small to begin with, right? But even worse on our side of the house, ladies and gentlemen, why? On the side of the house, there won't be a check and balance. Because notice, ladies and gentlemen, there are no certain obligations why United States would care to African countries, for example. Because all of those particular things are just a politic thing. The moment United States is their interest stops right there, is the moment when developmental aid is necessarily stopped there. But on our system, ladies and gentlemen, the moment when African countries and United States under one single government, therefore if African countries are not necessarily being catered, African countries have the voice to eventually try to demand the obligation from the structural government that existed. Meaning, ladies and gentlemen, even on the side of the house, the distribution is not necessarily utopic at the first place. Those particular bargaining power for this particular community that are not necessarily distributed is necessarily there to begin with. Because the structural government are necessarily obligated to, are necessarily binded to every single region in this particular world, right? But I'm going to extend why the idea of political stability are necessarily better on our side house. Notice, ladies and gentlemen, the international politics that exist right now are the international politics that are divided into two polar spectrums. For example, the fight of politics in European countries, for example, are the fight of left wing and right wing. Notice, ladies and gentlemen, this particular fight happens because they could eventually having another country as the example of the bad thing happen to their particular ideology. On the side of the house, the moment when you don't have another country and the moment when you eventually having one single government, meaning, ladies and gentlemen, the idea of this particular political spectrum is necessarily will be decreased. Exactly engaging to the idea why we can eventually counter those particular communists or leftists or rightists at the end of the day. Because you don't have any precedents to eventually say that those particular ideology are necessarily bad. The moment when you eventually have the cosmopolitan government is the moment when you're being inclusive in terms of discourse. It's not necessarily having differences, because now you're one, you're addressed as a human being, you're addressed as a global citizens, and we're very proud to propose.
Deputy Prime Minister spent 7 minutes and 25 seconds.
To close the case of opening bench, I call upon Mr. Stefanus. The floor is yours.
Ladies and gentlemen, we just listened to all the wishful thinking that already given by the government side. They already said that all the fantasies that they gave to us, that when this kind of policies happened, and suddenly all the problems inside Indonesia suddenly disappeared, for examples. But for us, we believe that it is so very unrealistic, while in the same time we also think that they are so very untrue in some of their words, with all the big words that only confuse us, while actually we are derailing from actually the real problems from this situation. So, ladies and gentlemen, go to the first problems right here that we must understand. They believe that just because it happened, there's a unification between all the government, suddenly all conflict already stopped in that place. But no, ladies and gentlemen, how many times Indonesia is still in conflicts, even we already unite for 75 years? There's still conflicts happens here and there. There's still conflict from one places to another places. So just by this, ladies and gentlemen, only just by having one nation only, which we all our differences is not so very big. There's already conflict happen. So by this, ladies and gentlemen, how if we create that so much tribe, so much people into one countries, it will be even much worse than ever. Because why, ladies and gentlemen, we must understand that every country, every nation, every tribe, they have their own different values. By understanding this, ladies and gentlemen, it is so very hard to unite them under one government, which their policies will affect everyone. For examples, Arab Saudi, for examples, they don't like LGBT value, for examples. How if this global citizen, this global government saying that, hey, I want that the LGBT value must be imposed in all countries. How these kind of things can be accepted, ladies and gentlemen? Of course cannot. How if the Turkish government also hate that? How if the another Muslim country also hate that? All of them will oppose this idea, ladies and gentlemen. Do you think that this kind of unification is the thing that you will achieve under this own government? Of course not. So just by having one government, just by having one global government, it will not solve all the countries. For examples, ladies and gentlemen, you can see right now in United States. In United States right now, they have you can say that they have a very powerful government. But besides that, you can see the very fact that their policies right there are actually influenced by a lot of, I can say that companies, by corporations and this sort of stuff. So in the end, this government, they will not work for their own people. They will not work and they will not serve their people because everything, all the policies that given by the government or released by the government, all of them are actually for the favor for this corporation. So now, ladies and gentlemen, can you imagine if this kind of government are actually influenced by bigger corporation from China, for example, or from United States? The one that gets affected is not only United States this time, but this time Indonesia also will be affected. What will happen with what you can say right there in Papua, for example, with Freeport? What will happen in Turkey, for example, ladies and gentlemen? What will happen in Palestine? What if the government favor Israel more? These kind of things, ladies and gentlemen, it can hamper all the situations. So under that kind of utopia, under that kind of argument given by the government with all their delusions that just by solving this we will solve everything, it is so very it will solve all the problems magically. They are not Jesus Christ, for example. So right now, I will give several further implications right here if you are actually following the policies given by the opposition sides. We believe that all the current conflicts that happen right now, it is something that happened, and we also can justify that. But before I go further, yes?
The reason why we cannot protect those who are being harmed in North Korea and Myanmar or all of those countries are because they have national sovereignty that prevents us from helping them. On our side, they won't have that, and we can protect those who are objectively harmed by their own government.
Ladies and gentlemen, if you refuse to get any help, it is your own right, ladies and gentlemen. It is your own right to actually choose what kind of future you want. And this is, ladies and gentlemen, much more better if that kind of choices are actually given by yourself, if you have it on your hand, not imposed by somebody else. So in this kind of situation, ladies and gentlemen, you cannot solve all the conflicts that already happened for 100 years, for 200 years, for 500 years, and you expect that it will magically disappear just because you have one government? No, you even can get a much more bigger conflict in the future. So go to my further implications. What actually can happen inside our policies given right here? So we believe that just by doing this, it can actually empower the change that happens inside the nations themselves. Because why? Because all that kinds of decisions, all the policy makings and everything, it is all given to you, on your hands. So even you want to kill each other, even you want to commit suicide all together in one nation, at least it is your own decisions by that own nation. Not because somebody from the United States says that, oh, hello right there, please, we want to impose this kind of values to you. Oh no, of course you cannot do such a thing. This kind of values, ladies and gentlemen, when you are actually have that kind of power inside yourself, there will be a sense inside yourself that I want to change into something better. I want to be someone who are actually better, because all the future of my country is actually on my hand, not by somebody else in Jakarta, for example, trying to tell something to what you will do in South Africa. By doing such a things, ladies and gentlemen, this can happen only when you are doing or you are actually deciding what kind of future you want on your own countries. By this policies, ladies and gentlemen, we believe that it is much more better. Even if it is something that's so very bad, at least it only happens inside your country and it's not spread to another country. And second, ladies and gentlemen, actually, you also must, by doing this, the country can be much more peaceful. Why we say that under this all secret policies? Why do we believe that this is much more peaceful? Because when there is a conflict happens, the conflict happens only inside their countries. When there is a conflict happens, only some countries are actually involved right there. But ladies and gentlemen, this kind of conflict, even when you have have one government, it will not solve this conflict magically. Like you can say that so many perang suku happen in Papua, even we already have one government. So can you imagine if, but at least this conflict will stay there even when the conflict stays there forever. But it will not spread to another country just because you are creating or imposing, saying that, okay, we will hate all the European nations because they are trying to impose LGBT to us. With doing this such a thing, ladies and gentlemen, it will actually, even there is a crack inside the society, it only happen in some places, not happen in all places. So that's why we want to oppose the policies which is so very bad in our opinion.
Deputy Leader of Opposition spent 7 minutes and 33 seconds.
To echo the closing bench, Anselmus, the floor is yours.
why this kind of need to be implemented, and they just bring like they likely want to, but not explain about the current problem that make this kind of thing happen, and will and as we know in status quo right now, we know that why there is a lot of conflict causes in a lot of country. It's because of they coming from a different country and different background. And as we know, here we like to make this world like lead by one system like led by one government, and make a new government will be elected democratically by our mechanism. First is by proportion of represented, and second democratic elected. It changed periodically 5 to 6 years. As we know, our goal is we want to create equal prosperity, because of we regret the fact of the country, a lot of country built unjustly. What we mean unjustly? Because of too many countries just built without create beside the society what we mean here, because the society needs a structure, or the structure, or what they want is not justice when the moment that they rebirth in the country, and most of the society that born in the some country is because of colonialism. As we know, like Africa or Middle Eastern, they can become the country because of the from the other country like UK or Europe colonial, and not built as a country that what the society want and the background of the society. And this also create a problem because of the society have to build in different culture and different background. As we know, the conflict is when the moment that they feel unjustly because like for example they burn in Indonesia or burn in UK. It's a different country, and they don't in Indonesia and still developed country don't have facility that the in UK get, because UK is in status quo is a big country that have a big power, and the problem is they don't have a same capability between each country because the different character of the country.
Ladies and gentlemen, that is what will happen in South Korea right now. That's why we send a lot of our people to go to study abroad, so they will bring the knowledge all right here. So when you say that there is a different technologies or even a different knowledge or different capabilities, it will not happen in the status quo anymore.
As we know, like people in developed country or more developed, it's different, and that's the way the different facility that they get. It's just unfair for us. That's the way we need to make the country to be peacefully with replace all the existing government to be a civil global democratic, because as opposing opposition said that in the fact that they need to with the different culture and different value that with other country, it will be worse if it can make to be global democratic. We think all the problem is coming because of the different capacity and facility that they get. That's the way it will be good if they become one system democratic in this world. Because as we know, the problem is the biggest harm is that human is and all of this harm derive from inventorization cluster, because we are going to solve this problem because they don't need to live in system that they don't have equally prosperous. That's the way. At least if we make this regulation to be one in this world, at least people can choose. We break down the country that will be led by one system. The people can choose the freedom of they want to live, and they can give safe capability and facility with other countries. And the second is we want to equal protection. Like if one of the country getting conflict, like medium to search a food, or there will be a war, there will be one system. When the moment that one country getting conflict, there will be hand in hand to be together to solve all of the problem. Because if one getting harm, there will be another country will getting harm, and that's the way they can together to solve the problem. And as a conclusion, therefore this can be solve the problem, because when the moment that they can be together, there will be there will be together to solve the problem in the society.
Member of government spent 7 minutes and 26 seconds.
Before proceeding to the next speaker, I hope the audiences can remain silent when they give their speeches. Thank you. To open the closing opposition case, I call Ms. Dwi and Mr. Urfan the floor is yours.
Creating single global democratic government means erasing our differences, and that's not okay. That's what we are going to talk about within closing oppositions. Differences among us are our valuable thing that needs to be preserved. It is the right of its own country to determine how their government systems, how their government policy, and how they would like to maintain their own security. Let's deal with the case that has been brought by the opening government. The opening government said that in the current status quo, we experience chauvinism. But there is no explanation why chauvinism is totally bad in the first beginning. Instead, they only say that chauvinism leads to dispute. So I'd like to deal about the dispute that being broached by the opening government. Ladies and gentlemen, dispute or conflict is our friends, right? But it's our friends. Conflict or troubles or disputes exist because there is a misunderstanding between one big community upon another big community. They tend to blame each other. So that's That's the fault. That's because the fault of individuals, not the government. So the solutions that they offer, it's not answering the problems because the problems comes from the majority of society, but not the government itself. We can blame the government if the government has an intention to fill the dispute itself or has no effort to deal with the problems. But in the current status quo, at least the government has no intention to fill the dispute itself. They want to maintain peace, they want to maintain the decent economy. They also create an effort. So we can't blame if there is a dispute, this is the mistakes of the government and the government system needs to be changed, mismatched solutions. Number two, chauvinism is totally okay. What does it mean by chauvinism? You didn't explain to us what is chauvinism. Chauvinism is a condition in which you think that your group, your value is upper hand compared to the other groups. We think it's really okay as long as you don't create tangible harms to other people. Chauvinism should be justified because it comes from past experience, history, from digging old ancestor books and so on and so forth until it comes up to the idea that your value is better off compared to the other. That's really okay, it comes from your experience day by day. We think their case is not relevant at all. Yes, please.
So, do you think that using chauvinism in not accepting immigrants in European countries are justified?
I don't say that I would admit that chauvinism is okay, but we could not solely use chauvinism as a reason to change the whole governments in the world. We think this is the mistakes of every single individual, and we've been working on it, so we don't need to change the whole governments in the world. Let's talk about the welfare that opening governments offer. In the current status quo, there is a problem in which many governments are selfish, they control another country and so on and so forth. They never explain to us how actually welfare occurs or how actually welfare is being created. In my opinion, welfare is being created if certain nations got privileged with good natural resources. For instance, they have oil, they have money, they have mining industry, which has a more bargaining position in the economic wars or in the trade wars. Number two, welfare is being created because there is a decent management, for instance, in the idea of workforce, ladies and gentlemen. Okay, assuming there is a single global democratic country, all natural resources will be cultivated by one single government. But the second factor in which good management or management the workforce or the people will not be implemented decently. Why? Because people will not feel relatable. Let's take a look. For instance, people who have different background, they are more agriculture. They more agriculture, they in rural area, and they don't want to open free trade, but because it is being led by single democratic country, they really must adopt the policy. We think this is not okay because people will lose their real relatability to their own country. They experience differences. They are being taught that their tribe is totally okay. So where's the reliability to the country itself? We think the management will be not okay. Yes, please.
Relatability happens because you have a government. So basically, if you have a single democratic government, you have the relatability, the structural government, because that is now your government.
Okay, I would like to answer as a way to rebut your argument that political spectrum will decrease in the current status quo. I would admit that political spectrum, if you run your government, it will decrease, but it will make that anger will follow. Why? Because people don't feel relatable. Let's take a look, ladies and gentlemen. Many people were born different, and they are being glorified that their culture. For instance, Aboriginal culture are better off. Japanese culture are better off. White culture are better off. Relatability is important in order for the individuals to participate, for instance, in elections, if they want to speak up, to assess the government's policy, if they want to contribute their own country. But in the current status quo, if their background are being erased, how actually their self-attachment toward the new government? We think it's really difficult to evoke self-attachment of individuals toward the new government itself, because we were being glorified since we were born that we are better off compared to the others. So it's really important if we preserve our own differences. Why it is okay? Because when you are being oppressed and you feel relatable with your own culture, you will fight for it. If you demand something to the new government, they will not answer your demand because they don't understand you. It's something new. Global democratic government means they uphold universal value. They will put aside any ethnic backgrounds, cultural background. So it is important if we go to our own governments, because they know our history, they know how it feels like being minority, and they will answer our demands. In the idea of security, we think this is better off. For instance, there is a lone wolf because there is no restrictions. That's all. Thank you.
Member of Opposition spent 7 minutes and 27 seconds.
To close the case of government bench, I invite Mr. Anselmus. The floor is yours.
Existence, and this is not an argumentation to establish a global government, ladies and gentlemen. That's why closing government that has been dismissed by the closing opposition presents to you an explanation why inherently nation is arbitrarily created, it takes away the freedom of individuals to mobilize, and by default it has been wrongly created and needs to be de-eradicated, and the only way to solve that is by eradicating all of the nations that have been created and having one single global democratic government, ladies and gentlemen. That's why I'm going to explain to you later why principally this is the only way to solve the only problems that you cannot give to individuals. That is to say that when you're unable to solve the problem like corruptions or war or so on and so forth, nation sovereignty prevents individual to move from one nation to other places that they deem are more safe, for example, for them, that is more inherent and adequate for their livelihood. That is the inherent problem that exists in the current problem, ladies and gentlemen. Right? So before that, let me clarify several things from closing oppositions. Right? So the biggest thing, which is probably the same with the opening opposition, is that this is that you have certain difference, ladies and gentlemen. This is the biggest problem, right? Because there has been no explanation why suddenly, when you have a global government that is created based on democracy, which is based on voting, you will suddenly neglect identity, ladies and gentlemen. Because I will explain. Because we say that exactly when you have nationwide that is created by democracy, identity is the biggest factor of you creating your policy, ladies and gentlemen. That is why right now we have identity politics, where people intertwine politics in their voting system, because they say there is a concern that is inherently needs to be listened by the government, ladies and gentlemen. This is something that will not be eradicated on our house, because they are necessary to fulfill the needs of your society. That's why you will understand the necessity that they have as an individuals with identity backgrounds, with regional identity, and so on and so forth, right? But second of all, this is not the fault of government, right? This is the biggest lie I've heard. Because look, this is very wrong. Because what happened in Israel is Palestine is the government-led armies that contributed into the war in itself. In Syria, you have Kurds, you have United States, you have Turkey that from the government and systematically give capital and sends armies and self-weapons towards the society that resulted in the conflict. Furthermore, we have Africans that have been very corrupted, that the only way for the civilians to be able to search for food is to fight for one another. That's why we have lots of crimes. Tell me why is this not the contributions of the government? That is why we say this is the wrong of the government, and the only way to solve that is by eradicating those things, right? But before, yeah, sure.
How if the person who supplied all the war equipment to Syria is the one that will be your leader because of this one single democratic government?
So, firstly, principle, right? Why is it actually very harmful when in principle wrong when you have this kind of system? We have explained to you that this is unjustly created, ladies and gentlemen. That you are born in a world with different capabilities, that you have different political stability. Exactly what they said, right? Some countries actually want LGBTs, some countries don't want to protect LGBTs. Some countries are stable in politics, some countries are like Syria, when you are born with wars, and so on and so forth. There are inherent differences that exist at the current status quo. You also have nations with different economical capability. You have countries like nations like the United States that came able to fulfill not only the economical rights that you have, but also the capability to mobilize from lower class to middle class to higher class because of the existing economical capability that you have. And you have other nations just like Timor-Leste, for example, where it's even very hard for people to find their own food. This is principally wrong, ladies and gentlemen. Because not only that this is created arbitrarily to process like colonializations, like what happens in the United Kingdom or in Africa, for example, or bigger powers that have the power to control it in the past, like what happened in Spain when they control things in in Europe and determine which one is Portugal, which one is actually Spain, and so on and so forth. That determines which are actually the limit of your nation and which one is not actually the limit of your nation. We tell you that this limit is very arbitrary, it's not based on what society actually wants, ladies and gentlemen. We tell you that this is actually harmful, right? Because number one, that with the concept of nations, it's hard for you to move away from places that you don't like, ladies and gentlemen. So when it's no longer adequate for you to live a peaceful life, it's hard for you to go away because you have the concept of border. Furthermore, when you live in North Korea, they prevent you from going away, ladies and gentlemen, right? So second harm, is that some of that division actually creates door harms like what happens in Africa when the countries are arbitrarily created by the European nations. The cultural tribes are not adequate to those nations, and that creates into tribe wars, ladies and gentlemen. Like, and also what happens in the Middle East, the divisions of the Kurdistan, that some of them live in Syria, some of them live in other nations, for example, it prevents their self-actualizations. That is exactly harming the less self, ladies and gentlemen. That's why you have lottery of birth, the notion of lottery of birth. Because wherever you are born right now, it's a lottery and no one can predict that. It's very hard for you to change, ladies and gentlemen. This is very harmful. This is principally the thing that is very harmful. Because it takes the only thing that we're capable of things that humanity needs to have. That is to say, the freedom to determine their own life, of what they should do with their life and where they want to live. This is something that inherently will never exist on their side of the house when you have nation sovereignty, ladies and gentlemen. Right? This is the most important thing to be talked about in this debate. Why? Because it's very hard for you to make sure that there are going to be a peaceful resolutions. The only thing that you can make sure that can happen in this world is the capability for people to move away from one conditions to another conditions, and that can only exist when you no longer have nation border, ladies and gentlemen. Right? Second of all, how to solve the conflict, right? So they say that each nation have their own identity. We still have this, but we still have different religions, right? The question then how to solve this. We tell you that number one, we have representations on our side now. So we say that you will care about the interest of your constituent, religious, whether or not they're racial minority, they're cultural minority, and so on and so forth. Something missing is why this is enough. Because now every identity is united, ladies and gentlemen. So identity that are right now is being sporadic, like African, like Asian, that are being minorities. So most of the countries can be united as one constituent because in number they are really great. Right? That's why on our side of the house you have the interest to unite this particular minority, saying that they are a worthy voting bloc that needs to be listened, and all of your demands needs to be listened right now, ladies and gentlemen. Second of all, it's worse on the opposition, right? Because some people who share the same identity cannot be protected because now you spread them based on the current nation's divisions that are actually happening right now. That's why we still say some Christians can still be minority in some cases, even if they are actually in numbers are very great. But the thing, and the most important thing, is that objective harm are justified to be neglected on their side also, ladies and gentlemen. Because you have the concept of national sovereignty. That in the context where you already have concessions of human rights violations, on their side of the house, you will never be able to protect that because no one will want to listen to that. On our side of the house, you will be ruled by one single government that will make sure you listen to this objective harm and prevent you from harming other nations. But that is how you solve conflict. When you have one nation and you don't have anyone that could your hearts and your lawyers, gentlemen. We are very proud to propose.
Government whip spends 7 minutes and 32 seconds.
To close and sum up the debate, I summon Mr. Haikal. The floor is yours.
Panels, I think that the closing opposition is the only one that were a clear definition of what this government is going to look like, right? Because what we tell you is that we understand that current governments are not perfect, but then understanding that current governments are led by humans and your global government will also be led by these same humans. This means that all the problems that exist on local government will exist also on your global government, right? Well, we told you on our side of the house, the benefit is that you keep any damage or any benefits to a small scope. This makes it much more manageable. This makes it much more easier for you to control anything that happens within the reaches of that nation, right? So, what are we going to do to in my speech?St of all, we'll talk about the idea of principle, right? By the idea of history and attachment is also something important. But later on, we'll talk about the case that came from the opening government, talking about the idea of chauvinism and why we think the conflict is still likely to exist on their side of the house. But we would like to point out to you that we think that opening opposition did a good job of finding out the idea of cultural values and differences, yet they never really explained the importance of attachment and history and why that is the current identity of a nation is always based on the history of that nation, right? We think that that's where they're lacking in this debate. That's where we come in. So let's first kick out closing government from this debate, right? So they want to talk to you about two things. Number one, they want to talk to you about the idea of freedom of movement. When you have a problem in one nation, you can move to another nation, and on their side, that can't happen in opposite side of the house. That can only happen in the government side of the house. Let's first point out why this is wrong, right? First of all, we can see the idea that there are different capabilities, and we can see the idea that there are nations that have different standards of human rights, right? But what we told you on our side of the house is that we think that you still have the freedom of movement, right? On our side of the house, when you are not happy with the Syrian government, when you feel that you are oppressed by the Syrian government, you are able to move as a refugee to another nation. When you feel oppressed by the Indonesian government, you are able to move to another nation as a refugee. On their side of the house, what's going to happen if the government has a bad policy, right? You cannot escape that policy, right? The policy is going to apply to everyone in the world. This means that you will not have any choice to what kind of policy you can accept, right? You're going to be forced to accept this only policy, and you can't face any kind of changes within the policy themselves, right? So if you want to talk about the idea of freedom of movement, we think it exists much more better on our side of the house, right? But the second idea is on the idea of, there are problems like corruption, there are problems like human rights being neglected, right? Number one, they never explain why it's not likely to exist on their side of the house, right? Because exactly, when you only have one government and there are no other governments, whatever this government says is true is going to be law. If they say that African Americans should be killed off, that is law. So what happens is that no other governments can say that this is bad because these other governments do not exist in the first place, right? We think that that's exactly why there is a huge problem, right? Because on your side of the house, you give one power to a small number of people, and these number of people get to determine what is right and what is wrong. They basically become God. We told you that that's not the good idea of a world, right? We think it's much more better when governments exist individually, and therefore you are able to call out other governments, right? Even if they want to bring the example of North Korea, we think the idea of organic change can still happen anyway, right? They haven't explained to us why the idea of organic change cannot happen. Even Saudi Arabia, that was oppressive to women in the past, was also willing to go through organic change to become more open to women. We can see that it takes time, but we think that's much more better because other nations can still call out that that is bad, right? When you go on their side of the house, you have one standard of human rights, and no one can say that this is wrong or this is right. Only the president or whoever is in power can determine what is right or wrong. No one else can call it out, right? So the idea that came from the closing opposition has never been really explained, has not been explained, and we don't think the idea of lack of movement or the idea of bad human rights standard is necessarily important in this debate. I'll take opening.
Sir, that premise only fine if they could explain the likelihood that the government will be bad. Because notice, on our system, the representation and the structural election would be that good and feasible.
Yeah, but you said that all the governments in the current status quo are bad. You said the president of America is bad. These people are the people that are likely to become your president, right? So why is it any different? Unless you're going to call someone from Mars who is not someone who's currently living on Earth, we think that the only people that you have to become president are the people who currently exist. And if you say that all of them were bad, then they're the only people that you're going to choose as your leaders. We don't understand why it's different on their side of the house. But let's go into the opening government case, because this is something that they want to talk about. The idea of, chauvinism, on the principle they want to talk about the idea of chauvinism and whatnot, right? Number one, we think my previous speaker already explained to you why the idea of chauvinism is something that is going to be inherent, right? The idea of conflict, the idea of being seen superior to other is something that is going to be inherent. They think it only happens because of nationalism, but we think that it's going to exist no matter what. If it's no longer based on nationalism, you're going to base it on race. You're going to base it on privilege, right? I am richer than you. I can buy a better car than you. Therefore, I am better than you. So we think on your side of the house, we still have the idea of conflicts, right? But the problem on your side of the house is you do not allow laws or you do not allow certain norms in society to apply to these individual differences, right? Because we think the idea that, some people in some states might think that LGBT is bad, we think that that is entirely valid as long as it comes from the people themselves, right? On your side of the house, you don't create any accommodative policies to these kind of people, right? What you're most likely to do on your side of the house is exactly create a policy that is going to be universal and is going to be accepted by anyone. True, you're going to have things like basic human rights. We can see you're going to allow people to eat, to sleep, and everything like that. But the problem is that you're not going to allow cultural things, right? For example, in Indonesia, when we think that religion is an important part of our government, we mix it with our state. But in this global government, you haven't explained to us why it's likely that the government is willing to accept this idea of religion into their state, right? Most likely it's going to be dictated by certain nations who are chosen and certain nations who are most in power, right? But number two, we also told you the idea of government should not come from should not be based on the standard of the United States or human rights or whatnot, right? It should be always based on what the nation thinks is most proper for their nation. Some examples. Number one, for example, you look at Indonesia, right? How we went through history of having an MES, for example, we went through a process of state, we went through a process of having a prime minister, and we think that didn't apply with us, right? We saw how that kind of state exactly created more conflict or created more instability within our nation. That's why we changed back to the current form of Republic Indonesia, right? If you want to look at Saudi Arabia, for example, how they saw and how the idea of voting is not going to be something that's good within Saudi Arabia, and that's why they tried to make it into a monarchy, because that creates subsidized housing, that creates more benefits for people, right? So we think that on our side of the house, the idea of government, true, not all governments are going to be perfect, but we also think it's not going to be perfect on your side of the house. The comparative is, on our side of the house, the people can choose what kind of government they want, the people can choose what kind of government that they think is most stable, and that's the best sort of government for these people, because that's the one that they're going to need, that they're going to want the most. We told you how the history and the trial and error of nations is important, because this is when we're talking about relatability, and we talk about how people want to devote themselves to their nation, this is the most important thing that we need to talk about, right? Finally, on the idea of oppression to majority and minority, something they wanted to point out to you is that we're always going to try to appeal to the minority because they're now a part of your global nation, right? That's not necessarily true, right? We think minorities on your side of the house become even smaller, right? Number one, because we think that currently the Papuans, for example, are already a very small part of Indonesia. They're going to be an even more small part of the 7 billion people around the world. But number two, governments on your side of the house are less likely to help minorities because these governments do not have any obligation to the minorities, right? The reason why African Americans can demand compensation from the United States is because the United States oppressed them in the past. The reason why Papuans can demand for compensation is because the Indonesian government oppressed them in the past. When you have a global government, there's no idea of compensation anymore, right? Everyone is literally the same. But that means we do not create special needs and special ideas for these people who have a long history of oppression, right? We told you that history is important, meaning that people should determine what kind of government they want, and based on that, we're more than happy to oppose.
Opposition whip spent 7 minutes and 22 seconds.